Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second Reckoning Salon Artist Talk, presented by the Paul W. Zuccher Gallery at Stoller Center. I'm Karen Levitov, Director and Curator, and I'm honored to be joined by our panel of Art Department faculty artists. I'd like to welcome Stony Brook students, faculty, staff, and community members near and far to today's talk. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Jefferson's Ferry's future residents. This is the kickoff event to their virtual series in partnership with the Stoller Center. The online Reckoning faculty exhibition presents artwork created in the past year by Stony Brook University's internationally renowned faculty artists that expresses a range of individual and collective experiences we are living through and the underlying conditions that have brought us to this crossroads. I'd like to thank Professor Stephanie Dinkins for suggesting the title Reckoning, an apt expression of a coming to terms with the issues and challenges leading up to this moment, and to thank the faculty artists for all their creative expressions of this concept. Links to the Reckoning faculty exhibition and the related Reckoning student digital mural can be seen on the gallery's webpage, zucchergallery.stonybrook.edu, where you will also find a recording of our first Salon Talk. The format of today's salon will be as follows. After this introduction, we'll have brief presentations by each of our 7 artists, followed by a moderated discussion, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. Please write your questions in the Q&A box at any point during the event, and we'll respond to them during the last 15 minutes of the salon. And I'm now pleased to introduce our panelists. Associate Professor Isak Berbic works with photography, moving image, and performance. His recent projects reimagine social narratives to unearth contested histories while investigating ideas around photographic representation, politics, geographies, economies, ecologies, archaeologies, exchange, and transformation. Isak.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you everyone at Zuccher Gallery. And thank you to all of my colleagues and friends. I'd like to just share my screen to show another image. What we're seeing here is Pangea, a recent artwork I made in response to the sort of overwhelming feeling of the global pandemic that has really brought us through the air much closer to one another than we really think we are. But I'm going to share the project that I am showing in this exhibition. So I'm usually an artist that makes photographs, and I usually work with ideas that challenge photography's ability. For example, oil fields in the sea, something that you can't really see, even you have the technique of visualizing it, something that you can't really see, how to look underneath a structure and how to use photography for that, sometimes very impossible. And sometimes that process reveals that impossibility of photography. Or obliterated cultures that we have artifacts about, but a very limited access, and what photography participates in those relationships, how photography participates in those relationships. But here, I am actually wearing a hat of an editor or an organizer. You could say some people also use terms like curating, but in this case, what was created was a zine or a book or a magazine. During this summer that just went past, I worked with my partner and collaborator, Faust Cabra, And we worked in sort of several ways simultaneously. One aspect was to remain outdoors and be with people in Brooklyn, which is where we are living over the last almost decade now. And also to actually produce in this mode of uncertainty, in this mode of closed galleries or viewing spaces. So the thing that emerged as the possible project was a magazine with artwork, or broader than artwork. In our case, we also have contributions which are essays and even puzzles and horoscopes. So Tame the Wilderness came out of actually something that was said during the Mount Rushmore speech during the summer, which is a trope that is used to sort of describe the urbanization and the development of the United States, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, how that trope is used and the implications of that language. So we try to really sort of upturn those ideas. And here I would like to just sort of scroll through and mention the collaborators. Here are, as you can see, there are 22 names, and among them you can recognize even colleagues from Stony Brook, as well as one former student, Jeremy Dennis. He is one of our art students that has been doing really well, and he has created a project called the Shinnecock Portrait Project, in which he photographs the East End of Long Island, working with leaders in the community, in the Shinnecock tribe, which he is a tribal member of, to document their existence and actually to document it in the format where he interacts with Google Images to fill in this sort of absence of information, absence of photographic and information otherwise. But as you can see, we created a magazine or a zine, and a lot of the collaborations were very much right in the moment, as in working during the moments of transformation, during the moments of upheaval. It's very challenging to remain critical. It's very challenging to have a kind of coherence and focus when everything is so much up in the air. And this is the moment in which our project, Brief Histories, the title of the project, really thrives. So sort of working with immediacy, working right away, and addressing issues which are right in front of us on the albeit on the television or in our real lives, in our apartments, in the front of our buildings, and so on. So this is the magazine. And I showed Jeremy Dennis. Maybe I can highlight another interesting aspect to it. We included a printed poster. Actually, I will show that as a little video clip. You can see here the poster being printed by Lucky Risograph on Canal Street in Manhattan. This is a poster by Dred Scott, one of our friends of the department, who was also a visiting artist with Jenny Polak 2 years ago. And as you can read, it's also titled Redistribute Health. It belongs to a suite of posters that Dred Scott creates. Let me just make sure that I am watching the time. Time is up. Thank you. Okay, thanks for warning me. I will now stop sharing. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Isak. Okay, we'll go on to our next artist. Our next artist is Toby Buonagurio. Professor Toby Buonagurio is best known for her colorful, offbeat, tongue-in-cheek ceramic sculpture inspired by extensive international travel for the purpose of cultural exchange and an unapologetic affection for popular culture, American and otherwise. Toby. Oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Toby, I think you're muted.
Okay. Is that good? Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Karen Levitov, the director of the Paul W. Zucker Gallery at Stony Brook University, and her assistant, Georgia Lemaire, for curating this exhibition. Reckoning is the first studio art faculty exhibition held at the Zucker Gallery that specifically addresses a theme. Typically, for studio faculty group exhibitions, faculty present their latest ongoing art research. Research, which in my case is rather hyperbolic, figurative ceramic sculpture, my primary medium, aesthetically and conceptually for over 50 years. However, given this particular timely exhibition, I decided I needed to make a work that was a departure from my ceramic sculpture. I felt it needed to be uniquely dedicated to this exhibition and actually abstract. Initially, my intention was to make a photograph. My ceramic sculpture is always highly reflective, so I chose to create an arrangement using reflective elements as a visual metaphor for optimism. When the arrangement I had configured was lighted, it sparkled with colored, changing light reflections. But what I was actually seeing with my naked eye, I was not capable of capturing in a still image. In order to demonstrate the moving punctuations of colored lights, I created my first, very short, 1 minute, 20-second video titled Everyone. As soon as I viewed the video, what immediately came to mind was the music Sunrise, the prelude to Richard Strauss' 1896 composition, also Sprach Zarathustra, the soundtrack made iconic by Stanley Kubrick's 1967 movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Thank you, and here is Everyone.
Thank you, Toby. Associate Professor Stephanie Dinkins holds the Kusama Endowed Chair in Art. She is a transmedia artist who creates platforms for dialogue about artificial intelligence as it intersects race, gender, aging, and our future histories. She is particularly driven to work with communities of color to co-create more equitable, values-grounded artificial intelligent ecosystems. Stephanie.
Thank you, Karen. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here and talking to you all about our art practices at this crazy moment that we are inhabiting. I'm going to share my screen with you to share the piece that I contributed to the exhibition live. It is a online WebXR experience, we will say, that tries to, let's go this way. Let's get you there first. Here, let's do it that way. That tries to take account this moment very particularly, right? So the piece is called When Words Fail. And it's this kind of crazy thing that you can come in and play. It features volumetric video of me doing this weird performance. And in this instance, the performance is simply to scream into the camera, because that is how I've been feeling about this moment. And I don't feel that there are many very many words to coalesce that feeling. And sometimes you just actually need to do the thing. And in fact, Iceland agrees with me. I didn't know this was a thing, but Iceland has a webpage that you can send your screams to, and they will release it into giant fjords, right? So it's this crazy moment where people are recognizing, oh, there's a moment in which there's something that we all want to do and maybe say. And so I've been working on these pieces that live on the web and try to give us this full circle way of communicating with each other. So this piece, right, not only am I screaming at you, and I'm not going to do the audio because it's kind of piercing, it's a little crazy, but I give you the space to scream with me or really to do whatever you'd like. So the invitation is for someone to come to this page, play around with it a bit, and hopefully discover this little icon, which is a woman with a megaphone and a nice Black Power fist. If you click it, you get this. How are you feeling, right? Where you can then, if you agree, hit record and do whatever action you would like. You can say things into the camera, you can dance in front of the camera, you can scream in front of the camera. And all those gestures are archived, along with a few other things that come together. And let's see if we can get these. I was fiddling with this last night, which is a thing I should not do before big presentations, but because who can resist this kind of thing? But there are these little boxes where contributions can then pop up and show up. So if you all go to this webpage, right, when words fail, herokuapp.com, and I'll share it in the chat after I'm done, you can go and contribute your own gesture. And that would be great. And this is a path that I've been on right now. So it's taking our contributions and thinking a lot about what we need to do. And then really it's thinking about community care, because the bigger questions that I'm thinking about right now are, especially in relation to AI, are this idea of can we code, right? Can we encode care into our digital civic systems? Right? In other words, I'm thinking a lot about direct democracy, right? Because here we are at this point where we still don't know what's going on in our presidential election, and we still don't have direct, right, representation in terms of one vote, one person. And so I'm thinking about AI and the ways that that might help us have that happen. And the first steps in these kinds of things are to make these sites that allow people to contribute their thoughts. And eventually I'll ask them for what they're actually thinking about in a deeper way. For example, right now I'm working on a project at Open Source Gallery that's related, where if you come to complimentary Heroku.app, you can come here and record a statement. And down here, like these folks have recorded, and this guy down here, he is ranting about the world's most powerful person, because I asked the question, if you could tell the most powerful person about yourself and your community, what would you tell them? And so he goes off on a tangent about why is there a most powerful person, which is kind of one of the things I really love, because that's one of the questions. Why are we engaging ourselves in this way, especially at a time when we can all have a more direct say in the way that we're governing ourselves, in the way that I would say we're caring for ourselves. And so I'm just working on systems that try to make that more and more applicable. And that's where the idea of reckoning comes to me, because my reckoning becomes about making systems that help our systems work better. Thank you. And I will stop sharing now. Hola.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, whoops, let me, thanks, Stephanie. Our next artist is Qin Han. Adjunct lecturer Qin Han is a digital artist and printmaker. Her work adapts a traditional approach to our digital era, but formally grounded in painting, drawing, and printmaking. Her work questions the experience of transition and relocation. Qin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Karen. So this is a new series I started in this summer. So in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, many of us has turned to nature to reduce the stress level, to improve mental health and stay physical active. One depressing day that I left my home and going to the woods. I was walking in a quite natural land on Long Island, and I noticed some trees that is dead, but with some new growth on the branches. And I stopped. So while dead trees may not be the most attractive part of the forest, but they was once thriving, as dead trees decomposed and it fertilized our land. So I was questioned, what is the relationship between human society and the ecosystem? And the ecosystem is similar to human society, social society, which some part of it is dying during the crisis and some part of it is continuing thriving or growing. So with that in mind, I bring some paper and come back to the woods, lay down the paper on the forest floor and started to draw, use the dead tree branches, charcoal. So that is where I think human existence of the current pandemic is apparently mostly local. And then beside local, we live online. But as an immigrant, that for me, migrate is such a big part of my life that I cannot live in one place locally without connecting to the other part of my home. So that is now limited, and the tree is local, but the thinking never stop at local. I search the internet and see what happens in the news, in the current paper research, and then I put another thought onto the layer of charcoal, that this can be online as well. What happens to the globalization and which part of the dead tree related to the society, which part is dying and which part is growing. So I turned this dead tree image into a short animation about globalization. It simulates the neon lights that the globalization is going to crash. But at that moment, it was really depressing. The high price of the air ticket from my previous home and here becomes unavailable. Everything connects only internet. So when I research on the papers and newses about global pandemic and globalization, things becomes quite clear. The things thrive and the things are dying. So the text related to each part is which simulates the nature and the society. And that is how I was thinking the discussion between the growing trees, the growing nature, the pandemic situation on between the social society and ecosystem. This series is an appreciation to the life through the ever-changing landscape as well as our system. Thank you.
Thank you, Qin. Adjunct lecturer Carter Johnson's diverse technological practice is unified by a political approach to media making that addresses technology in daily life. Employing video projection, algorithmic audio-visual generation, performance, and social media, his work intervenes into digital spaces and entrenched ideas. Carter.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be online with you today. And thank you, Karen and Georgia, for arranging this. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this work. So just to keep this short and to the point, I'm going to read something that I prepared. There are two of my pieces in this exhibit, two videos that I made around the same time that are approximately 10 minutes each. So which is why we can't watch the whole thing. As I speak, you should see a very brief clip here of one of them on a loop. But I would love it if you would take a look at the full videos on the site and spend a bit of time with them when we're done here. I see these two videos as forming two sides of the same coin. In my head, they form a kind of good cop, bad cop team. They each play different roles, but they are interrogating the same subject and investigating the same issue. For me, that issue is what our relationship is, what my relationship is with digital media, an issue that has become even more pronounced for many of us in the past year. As the title of the show, Reckoning, suggests, I see these two pieces as an attempt to account for that relationship. So just a bit about the two videos. One video, the one that you don't see here, is possibly a bit more straightforward and a bit more minimalist. What you would see is a closely cropped shot of a hand swiping a series of frames on an iPad that consists of bright colors, but which are otherwise largely blank. And that goes on for a while. But what you will hear is something completely different, and you have to go watch it to find out. So I think that one of the things that it asks is what the relationship is exactly. What is the relationship between what is seen and what is heard? The other video, an excerpt that you do see here, I would say is a bit more Baroque in that than the first. It is the end of a months-long process in which I documented in video the making of a series of things, objects and compositions, one each day. Each object or composition took a maximum of 5 minutes to create. In the end, the viewer never gets to see those objects, but only the end of the editing process, in which I overlaid the clips one atop the other and applied what's called a chroma key algorithm, which is a fairly simple algorithm that in many editing programs. Its job was to eliminate a small range of hues from the clips and render those areas transparent to the other clips layered below. Okay, so that's it. I look forward to talking a bit more about this later, answering any of your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Carter. And I should mention that all of the artists who have either video clips or links to online projects are on the gallery's website, as well as the artist pages. They can send links to those, but the gallery webpage at zucchergallery.stonybrook.edu has a link to the Reckoning online exhibition with those other links. Jason Parody. Jason Parody is a full-time lecturer. In his work, there is a sense of contemplation or of reverie that speculates on fundamental mysteries, this being the result of a lot of camping under an expansive sky in the northern Canadian wilderness. Jason.
Thank you, Karen, Georgia. Thank you all of the assistants at the gallery for helping me make my project grow by continually uploading drawings to this project. Just to kind of give you a little background on it, when Karen actually, or the gallery, asked to do this project related to events of 2020, I got a little kind of shell-shocked a little bit about, oh, well, what have I been doing in 2020? Like a lot of us, the pandemic, the shutdown kind of, with artists, I think initially we thought we'd have a lot of time to work in our studios, but as it turned out, there was a lot of other events and things that happened that kind of, in a way, kind of made us a little bit depressed about kind of what we were working. I certainly felt that when I was working into the studio and I didn't really quite know what to do or where to go. You know, my work, if I can briefly, I can't share the screen, Karen, I'm sorry. I will. All right, just to quickly show you what my work originally looks like. It requires space, it requires places to experience the work. There's literally hundreds of strings connecting paintings to sculptural elements underneath. So that kind of wasn't something that I could be doing or was able to do at that point. So sorry, Karen.
Do you want us to share your screen again or go back to my?
No, just go back to your screen. I just wanted to show that thing. I'm sorry about that.
That's fine.
Yeah. So I've always kind of returned to drawing. That's one of the things I've always kind of gone back to. These individual ink lines that you see, I wanted to show the installation just because that kind of relates to me to those individual strings that get connected to the paintings. And I sort of meditatively, painstakingly kind of draw these lines one at a time until I get a saturation of ink that is when I feel the drawing is finished. So these are all related as well to my paintings in the sense that they are skyscapes. They are star maps of events that have happened through time that I plot is exactly as they appear from certain locations into either paintings or the drawing, in this case, in the drawing on paper. So those maps are, to me, a reference to a place and time. My work has always been about the transfer of information, more specifically a memory of that information and how that memory is flawed, and how we can't quite always kind of remember exactly those times and places. So I went back to doing these drawings during the pandemic, and when Karen in the gallery asked to do something about events in 2020, an idea that I've been toiling with for a very long time about kind of juxtaposing events throughout history through a sky map and rendering them sort of the same, or kind of keeping them as, the sky is always being the same, where the events here on Earth change, and how our experiences with events on Earth maybe in the bigger scheme of things are small compared to the events compared to time. So I started plotting events of 2020 that have either affected the world, the nation, or me personally. So events like our current election that is happening, statements that have been made by people in power, the George Floyd killing, personal health issues that I've been going through. All of these things have been now plotted into moments in time. So as I start to make I gave myself a system. I'm gonna draw these the same way all the way. And I'm going to then, just read 30 seconds left. Yeah. So the idea was that all of these drawings will be presented, although each a different moment in history, a moment in time. As the series grows, and you can look at the website to see the growing series, you have to go back and kind of take a look at them. Everything almost looks the same. And that was a feeling that we've all been kind of going through. Even though time is shifting, time is changing, everything is remaining the same. All right, I'll end there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Great. Our last artist for today, before we move on to the discussion and Q&A, is Lorraine Walsh. Visiting Associate Professor Lorraine Walsh is an interdisciplinary new media artist working in animation, print, and all aspects of drawing. She has a lifelong passion for discovery at the intersection of art and science. As artistic director and curator for the Simon Center of Geometry and Physics, Walsh oversees art and outreach to share creativity and raise scientific literacy to the community at large. Lorraine.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to Georgia, and thanks to all my colleagues. I'm delighted to be here today. So I have a lifelong passion for science, and I also have a history of working in new media with code and animation. But the past few years, I have found myself rather busy, and I've turned back to drawing, and it's been really, really rewarding. And so I started this particular drawing pre-pandemic with an eye towards the environment and glaciers. And then on March 11th, when it was declared we had a pandemic, everything shifted. And I began to draw every day and date each day. So Karen, if you could go to the next slide, please. So they were like marks on a prison wall, like tally marks on a prison wall. I began to compile each day, drawing every day, and this is still an ongoing project. And I also began to think about time. And as we all know, time became very strange during COVID. and everything, there was a sameness and yet a distortion of time. And I recall Emily Dickinson's 1860 poem, Time and Eternity, one of her most famous poems, where she writes, "The clock stopped, and all of the best clockmakers cannot repair, so it, the clock that is, just now dangled still." And like then and now, I was welcoming some sort of expert clockmaker, using that as a metaphor to come in and move us forward. And that poem by Dickinson is particularly poignant and a great metaphor because it's actually about death. And she saw the pendulum of the clock as a heart. And so I thought it was a rather poetic metaphor for the time of COVID. And that's, I guess, all I have to say for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorraine. And thank you to all of the artists. Wonderful conversation and discussion about each of your works. I think you each have such interesting works. It's great to see them online and hear you speaking about them. I think what we'll do here, I'm going to leave this screen up for a moment, and then I'm going to stop a screen share so that we can see everybody's faces. For the audience, if you could type in any questions in the Q&A box. We'll have a brief discussion with the artists first, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So I just want to reiterate some of the themes that had come out in some of your work, and I think that a lot of your work has, you're coming from different perspectives and speaking about different issues of importance to you, but some of the themes relate across the work. A number of you were talking about, being in the pandemic, marking time and space at this time, changes in physical, digital, and social networks, relationships with community, with yourself, with people across communities, issues of the environment, issues of human expression, ranging from rage and exasperation to hope and optimism. And I think that, and many, many more themes as well. One thing I wanted to mention from our last Salon Artist Talk was that our moderator, Dr. Judith Brown-Clark, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, said that solutions come from creativity. And I like that idea of solutions being either direct or indirect, but that the arts often work indirectly by encouraging creative and innovative thinking, as well as more direct activist kind of art. So I think what I'll do is then go to, let's see, stop the screen share and ask a couple questions. I like the way Judith Clark kind of put a couple questions out there and let anyone respond who wants to, and then you can each take one question. And I think that and one of the ideas that came forth, like I said, was ideas of community, whether it's isolation or connectedness, and different ways of connecting with community. It's not really a question, but does anyone want to elaborate on that a little bit? Either raise your hand or unmute yourself and or just jump in. Anybody want to talk more about ideas?
I can speak to several aspects of that, as what I have been involved in are the sort of different methods of interacting with other artists, with other organizers. And I think what has been really important is that, in fact, we were also exchanging things. And that seemed to be really kind of crucial. Sometimes it would be food, because we would need to see people. And I'm speaking me and my partner, who would meet people on the sidewalk, masked, socially distant. But sometimes those interactions were like that, physical. Other times we were meeting strangers. One aspect of the project was fundraising, which was online like everything else. But another aspect was we were actually also selling ice cream right in front of our building. And this was the middle of the summer. and we were in full gear, and also selling individually wrapped ice creams. And this was really interesting because at the same time we were promoting the magazine, we were putting pages of the magazine on the ice cream cooler, and this is what people were talking to us about. So as soon as we had content from an artist, we would produce these mock-ups, and while it was in process, we would stick them to the cooler and use them as speaking aids while we were selling ice cream in the playground. So, and also some of the collaborations were neighbors. Sometimes they're neighbors like Stephanie Dinkins, who's also an artist and also works with me at Stony Brook University, but sometimes it was just neighbors. So
Yeah.
very different forms of community making and sort of interaction.
Yeah, I would like to jump on to that, Isak, since you pulled me in. Yeah, I think of community in lots of the same ways, right? I'm thinking about the Doppler effect a lot and how the community just waves out. And my practice has done that. You know, I thought when I started thinking about community-based projects that I'm working with my neighbors. And in fact, I've done projects that are like 2 blocks away, standing on the corner, reading books and exchanging books. But with AI in particular, I soon found that my community was global, right? And a lot of people I thought that I wouldn't be in community with. So like the captains of tech industry, suddenly if I want to work with them and have impact and change the way we all think about things, I have to think about them as members of my community as much as I think of my next door neighbor or Isak or any of the other professors and artists here in this Zoom as community, right? And so community changes and shifts, but I also think a lot about, you know, Venn diagrams and how those communities connect. And how we connect them and how we can use our ideas and what we're doing as artists to kind of pull people into spaces of thought and aesthetic experiences and ways of viewing the world to start resharing our ideas about what's going on, because we're running in polar opposite directions right now. So I think it's hyper important that we start, you know, coalescing in what ways that we can. So dang, I have to get over and get some ice cream, Isak, at some point.
Moved on to sardines. Tinned
Oh.
sardines.
I will pass on the sardines, but I can still say hi.
We're still research and development.
That's great. Great. Thank you, Isak and Stephanie. Yeah, and I think a lot of that, in addition to the ideas of connectedness, like you were talking about, there are also ideas of resilience and strength, and you know, and art making is part of that. I think that you know, a number of you talked about kind of changing directions during the pandemic, either because you know you were in a different physical location or were working online more and working from one location more. Toby, do you want to talk a little bit more about your kind of major shift in media or ideas? I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Okay. So yeah, as a sculptor, of course, my preferred medium was not something I wanted to pigeonhole into, you know, just force it into something for this exhibition. And it took me a long time to actually come up with an idea that was a more global, universal idea. And it was more about generating the sense of optimism. And that's so abstract. So I was, you know, figuring how could I represent that? Typically I make sculpture. And so therefore I thought I'm going to make a photograph, and I wanted to be sparkling. I wanted to look like, I was hoping it to look like, you know, a fireworks display, where usually those kinds of lighted skies are part of some celebration. And it becomes something people associate with a wonderful event. And so when I mean, I know we just showed a few seconds of the clip, but the whole video actually starts out quite dark. and then it lights up, and then there are just a few sparkling lighted moments at the very end. And it reminded me of many fireworks displays where at the very end, you're looking up at the night sky and you just see the diminishing of these bright points of light. And it, in my mind, was something I hoped would generate, when others saw it, a feeling of optimism. And it needed to be abstract for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Qin, you mentioned ideas of nature and healing and mental health. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? I think that, we've all had to deal with being in, having the, issues that we're dealing with, and how you use your art to work through that.
Yeah, I like that topic. Thank you. For me, as personal, creating art sometimes is being under pressure. This is the pressure that urged me to make something to release myself. So art has been such an important part of my life that clear my mind, or getting clear to one point that I understand the situation that I am now in the history of my life, or the situation in around the space and time I am in. So I think art making is the way for many artists that can express self and understand the world. But many other artists have other aspects, like Isak and Stephanie once mentioned earlier, the connection between the neighborhood, or as a leadership of the community. I took another aspect on that, since I work mainly in the suburban area, so mainly alone. As an artist, connecting with other artists using online lecture or virtual studio visit, well, for the development of a series of artists, a series of artwork, I usually dig into my own heart and stay alone until one point something inspires me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think Carter wanted to respond to that as well.
Yeah, in a way, I guess I'm responding to both of the first two questions or issues that you're addressing. I think they're linked for me anyway. So in the beginning of when all of this weird time starts at the beginning of the year, on some level for me, I look at myself as a somewhat of an introvert. I spend a lot of time alone, and I sort of get a lot of pleasure from my time spent with myself and working on doing my own work. And so in a way, in the beginning, I looked at it as a kind of gift. I live quite a long ways from the Stony Brook campus. And so not spending a lot of time in commute was a sort of gift for me. On the other hand, my studio is quite far from my house, and I share it with two other people. And so, I am a little nervous about taking the subway, and also being in close quarters with other people who I don't spend a lot of time with. And so I was forced to sort of give up my community, right? The people around me, that although we don't, it was just the sort of environment of other artists around me and other faculty being in school, and forced to be alone in my small space with my desk and my computer. And so on the one hand, it's sort of a pleasure to have more time to spend on my work. On the other hand, giving up community and space makes it a double-edged sword, right? It's a little problematic. And so I think in the two pieces that I are sort of the framing of the works is really important, and it's a very close cropped frame. And for me, there's a bit of joy and also a bit of claustrophobia in both of them. And that's sort of the way I feel about this. The pleasure that I get with extra time, perhaps, or not spent in commute, but then the problem of not being able to access my community or my space.
All right, thank you. Stephanie, Georgia actually had a question for you that I thought was a good one. Have there been any particularly moving audience recordings that were submitted to your project that you want to share?
Actually, no, right? So I haven't been pushing this. It's an interesting thing, right? So now I'm making these things that require this kind of pushing to get people to do the thing, which I'm just coming to terms with as a way of working and what that requires, what my engagement needs to be to get others engaged on a different level. And so for this one, not necessarily, but for others, you know, I think that in terms of complementary, like, you know, the guy who was railing about power and also people's willingness to just say what they need and stand in front of a camera. And I also had a dancer dance in front of the flags of complementary and dance her reply. And really that's my dream, like for people to act their thing, right? Like the dream for me would be to have a hokata, like somebody do the New Zealand, like that whole, because it's so based in community and tradition, but it's also a full-on expression. Like just to act in front of the camera and not be too self-conscious. The other thing is I wasn't counting on how self-conscious people are about like lending themselves to the camera. So now it's push, push, push. So come on, folks, give us some input. Let's see what happens, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone go and check that out. Are there any other questions from the audience that you haven't had a chance to type in? If so, type it in. And if not, then I think that I did have one more question. Oh, I just was interested if, you know, what is needed moving forward? Where do we go from here? Either, you know, you personally in your artwork or, you know, we as a society, where do you think, what's next? Maybe someone who hasn't answered yet, Lorraine or Jason, or if there's another aspect you want to talk about.
Well, I think that going forward, everything is going to be different because we can't go back to the way it was. And that's like, you know, in any sort of definition of physics of time is you can't go backwards. And so I don't know exactly what the future will bring, but I am generally very optimistic, and I'm well, I am optimistic, not generally, but I think what I've seen so far with the community of artists has been so wonderful, and the creative ways everyone has found, from theater to dance to visual arts, to express themselves and come together. And although I find it exceedingly frustrating to have to always communicate this way in our little boxes, but I also find it really heartwarming and wonderful the way people are connecting and where I live, even in the small galleries and coming out socially distanced with masks. And even, you know, my whole social life has changed. I now go on walks, like the walk has become such a wonderful thing. So the smallness of life has become very important. And I hope we bring that into the future. And then, and I think there will be a lot of joy when we're able to connect with our artistic community in person again.
Thank you, that was a great answer. Other comments or questions to each other or responses from any of you? Well, thank you all very, very much for your wonderful sharing your artwork and your thoughts and participating in the panel. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much to the audience. I missed, now there are a couple more questions coming in. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly say these questions because we do have a couple more minutes. Okay, so this is to Professor Walsh. Why do you choose to emphasize certain lines in your drawing? Why do you make some of them darker? And then I think are you trying to create a sense of volume? couple part question.
Yeah, well, with drawing for me, I don't know the end result. So each line determines the next. And so and it's a very meditative aspect as well. And time with drawing, I get lost. But yes, the darker lines are definitely for volume, but I want to emphasize they're not necessarily planned. There's a density in March, the March dates, where it was the beginning of the pandemic, and I actually worked back into it as the months went on, because I wanted to show the time during the pandemic that was the most volatile. But yes, definitely it's for volume and density and to create some depth.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, questions are now coming. Okay, so another question is, how can art be used to unify conflicting elements in society? I think it's just a general question for anyone who feels like jumping in on that question. How can art be used to unify conflicting elements in society?
I think that becomes about making space for conversation. I believe in conversation as a way to minimize the conflict, or at least to realize our similarities. But we have to be able to sit down together, or at least engage each other in that way. And so one of the things I'm usually trying to do is make space for people to have conversations, and maybe around a specific thing that I put out in front, but it could be any art object or thing that we're kind of putting forward and standing in front of together and conversing about. And then hopefully carrying that conversation a bit further than the one thing we're looking at.
I like that conversation. Other responses to that question?
I have one quick response. I think also what's really important is the different expressions and perspectives that are presented, like even with this one panel. And I think that it's a reminder to all of us, we see things differently because we are different. So, and using, the artistic practice in different ways is very healthy for our community.
Yeah, I agree with Stephanie that I think that just making space for dialogue, right? It's not really about unity, I think, per se, but about allowing the space for a dialogue to occur. And that if we're forcing a kind of unity, that in itself becomes kind of problematic, I think.
Thanks. There's one more question I see from Nobi Nagasawa. Moving forward, how do you effectively successfully engage students into our community? I think anybody could jump in on that one too. Toby, I think you're muted.
I'll say something to that, Nobi, and I think that as long as we allow students to understand that art making, everyone has the potential for making art, and you don't have to feel it's some God-given gift, that your contribution can be distilled in so many ways, and that in itself becomes our common elements. And once students realize that they all have ways of contributing and that will be respected, then I think art becomes the link that, really does communicate a whole nerve system for everybody to be part of.
Thank you. And Qin, you were going to answer one of the questions or respond?
Oh yes, I love the question Nobi raised. I think understanding the students and understanding how they think is the most efficient way for me. Their project actually speaks a lot about themselves, their caring, and the things that they value very much. From that, when understanding happens, the student definitely can talk more about their art and their community to instructor. And that time, I think the connection has been built up and things can happen above that. That's my thought.
Good. And one One more question popped up, and then I think we'll call it a wrap after that. We have a question from Rose Haynes, which says, do you think abstract painting is a help in expressing what is happening today?
Yeah, I can talk to that maybe in terms of, well, you know, abstraction has always been a way of kind of leaving it, the conversation as Stephanie was talking about, open-ended in terms of like being able to react and converse with a piece of art and with each other into not concrete ways. I think abstraction is a way that you let your emotions kind of enable the conversation and your feelings to enable the conversation going forward, where sometimes representation can tend to give you an answer. Abstraction is very open-ended. So I think at least it's an element that leaves the conversation open to all sides, maybe more effectively.
Thank you. Okay, thank you again to the panelists. Thank you again to all the audience and participants for your great questions and for listening. I hope you go to the webpage. It's securegallery.stonybrook.edu and also u.stonybrook./reckoning 2020 for the Reckoning exhibition. This lecture will be recorded and posted there, as well as the previous Salon Artist Talk. Again, thank you all and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Karen. Bye-bye.